Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Anakazi Arise Conference 2020. We are so glad that you were able to join us today. Yesterday was filled with so much inspiration from our speakers from around the world, and today we have more speakers to provide more information, more nuggets, more knowledge to help us throughout our entrepreneurships, our careers, and just through this pandemic as a whole. So please stay tuned, get your questions ready for each of our speakers. You can do that in the chat section and we'll be able to ask those questions and they'll be able to answer you after their presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off with our moderator, Sambo Chunda. Hi, Sambo, good morning.
Hello, good morning, Iko. Nice to see you today. Hello, Eureka. Hello, Professor Wood. Hello, everyone joining us live on Facebook and on the Anakazi webpage, as well as on Hopin. So I have the honor to introduce Professor Van Wood this morning, who's going to be our first speaker. Hello, Dr. Wood. How are you?
I'm fabulous. We are working with a bit of technology issues here, but we're ready to go.
Great, that's good. So a little bit about Professor Wood. Professor Van Wood is a specialist in international business. He spent more than 30 years involved in global marketing and trade. He was educated at the United States Merchant Marine Academy, spending about a year, more than a year, aboard a merchant vessel with port destinations of Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong. He was also educated at the University of Washington for his marketing degree. And then he did an MBA specializing in international business at the same university. He got his PhD from the University of Oregon. His teaching, research, and consulting focuses on globalization. And that's what he's going to talk to us about this morning. He accepted the Philip Morris Endowed Chair in International Business at Virginia Commonwealth University. He's been behind 25 international business forums that are hosted by the same Center for International Business Advancement, and he's published more than 100 articles in various prestigious journals. Professor Wood, please teach us about globalization today. We're really looking forward to hearing from you and learning.
Well, I'll try, Ensemble, and thank you so much for that nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think your organization has great attributes to provide to the world at large. And I look forward to working with them after this conference and so on. So what I'd like to do today is give you a quick overview of how I and a number of other observers around the world see this issue of globalization. And then, because that sets the stage. And then I'd like to propose for your consideration and for Anakazi's consideration, the formation of a interconnected group of government agencies, universities, and private businesses, particularly entrepreneurs, and how we're doing that currently in Virginia, and it's been very successful. So without further ado, let's move on to my slide set. Nicole, if you could put up the first slide, and I'll just indicate that next slide, that kind of thing. We'll move on. Okay, hopefully everybody can see this. This is the name of the lecture, Globalization, Meaning and Significance to Nations, Companies, and Individuals. Next slide. So the big issue is, what is globalization? Okay, let me start with a depiction of it in a photo. Next slide. That's what it is. There's our little blue dot. That's our world. That's all we got right now. It's a precious little thing out there. This is taken obviously from outer space, but it's critical that we take care of this, because for now, that's all we have. There's hope that someday we can go to another planet, but they tend to be really far away, at least what they call the Goldilocks planets, that we'll be able to survive on. So that's globalization. Take care of that place. We can all end up in a place where we have ample income and ample healthcare and ample education. But that's another story. Next slide. Another depiction of globalization is, I like it because it's where the lights come on at night. Okay, this is a composite picture, and I'm showing you a couple of these, from a satellite that NASA the American Space Agency takes and updates all the time. What it shows here is if you look at this, you'll see Canada, my country, the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean. And so if you look at it, you'll see where the lights come on, business is happening, globalization is happening, and wealth is being created. So if you look at the bright spots towards the eastern part of the United States, you'll see the New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, D.C. corridor. You'll see Florida. And then you move as you move west, the big cities in America, Atlanta, Chicago, et cetera, show up. And it's really quite lit up. If you go all the way to the West Coast, you'll see that we start with, it's lit up in Canada, in British Columbia, where Vancouver is. But then we move down to Seattle, where I got my first degree at the University of Washington, and then down to Portland, where the University of Oregon is in that state. And then you can see San Francisco, and then the corridor from Los Angeles down to San Diego and the border. Point being is where the lights are on, business and international business in particular are happening. Same thing if you move down to Mexico, the two bright lights you see there, the biggest one is Mexico City. It's one of the mega cities in our world today. And the other one's Guadalajara, where we have my university and I particularly have partners. Moving into the Caribbean, you can see that little bright light. I don't think you can see my cursor here, but a little bright light is that little island. That's Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has suffered lately because of hurricanes, natural disasters, and the pandemic, but it's lit up. That Long Island you see was only one little light. It's right below Florida. That's Cuba, and Cuba has not been engaged. Wasn't engaged for years. It's coming out of its shell, etc. And that gives you an idea of where the lights are on. Now look at this one. Here we have a very interesting one that gives you the full globe. If you move south of North America into Latin America, you'll see that Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, the lights are on. Chile, lights are on there around Santiago and whatnot. They're on in Argentina, where you see those bright lights of Buenos Aires. And as you move up, you'll see Brazil and the coast is lit up. I predict that these lights will get brighter and brighter. As we move eastward, you'll see the bright lights of Europe all the way back to Moscow, and the Ural Mountains. They're clearly that's a big part of the global trade and global business. And then as you move down into the Middle East, you'll see Turkey is lit up, Saudi Arabia is lit up, the Emirates are lit up. But look south into Africa. As you can see, Africa still remains fairly unlit. But my prediction is that, and these are updated regularly, so you can go on and look at Lights of the World by NASA on your Google, and you'll see that probably the most rapidly changing area to be continually being lit up is indeed the continent of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. You can see Johannesburg is really quite lit up there. Nigeria is lit up. Some of the eastern countries are lit up, are beginning to light up also. But you can see clearly India, if we move further east, is lit up. They have joined the globalized world. Eastern China, lit up. Japan, lit up. You see that little looks like a little island across from Japan. If Nicole, if you could point your cursor at it, maybe they would highlight it. It looks like a little island, but it's not an island, right? What that is that's if you go up a little bit, Nicole, what that is that's South Korea, okay? And the north is completely dark. The North Korean part of that peninsula is the Hermit Kingdom, is not engaged in world commerce. It's probably one of the more poor areas in the world, etc. Moving down, and you can see that Thailand's lit up, the east coast of Australia is lit up, etc. And so this map is another depiction of what globalization is, and it represents where growth and commerce is happening around the world. Next slide. So let's go back to some mundane things. I have a little definition here for you. Globalization is a force joining all sorts of elements of the human endeavor together: politics, business, intellectual elements, etc. And what it really means to business people, and what I tell my students, is that globalization do a better job than your competitors at satisfying consumer needs and demands for quality, no matter where they live. You can be in Africa, you can be in India, you could be in Europe, but you're in the globalized world, and you're competing with, as you'll see as we go through this, companies and entities and organizations around the world. Next slide. So if you do a quick little summary of overview of history, if you were a Martian and you landed on this Earth in the 14th century, clearly I think you would say the Chinese are going to rule. That period, China had giant ships, much larger than what Columbus had when he set sail for the Americas. They had sailed all the way to Africa. They sailed certainly to India. They were opening up trade routes into Latin America. They had the modern bureaucracy. They had the written language. They had gunpowder. They had all sorts of things. But in that same period, the Ming Dynasty emperor decided that, well, all this globalization, all this international trade that we're getting involved with, they're bringing new ideas to my country, and it's challenging my realm. So he stopped it. He literally burnt the ships, and he told his people, the Chinese people, if you talk to foreigners, I will kill you. And he stopped it. But at the same time, certainly after that, in the 15th and 16th century, two little lights came on in Europe. We call those the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, okay? And what it really amounted to is that we discovered that you could get knowledge from somewhere else besides God. You could get it from science. And we also discovered that wealth wasn't static, that you could create wealth, particularly if you went out and colonized and started more trade around the world. And so from that period when China closed up until just recently, I mean, literally just in the last 30 years, the West has dominated. For 500 years, Europe and the offspring of Europe, the United States, etc., has dominated this planet. Well, you're going to find out because of globalization, that's all changing. Next slide. Okay, so the first era of globalization was really the 1800s to 1920s. I put this slide up here because I want you to look at those, what drove it. It was the transatlantic cable, steamships, telegraphs, railroads. Those are all technologies. The transatlantic cable stretched from New York to London. It took 8 minutes for a message to get from one place to the other, and it was startling. People couldn't believe that we could talk to each other across the Atlantic Ocean in just 8 minutes. I ask you today, how many would you wait for a web page to take 8 minutes to upload? That would be like snail's pace. We'd never do it. Back then, unbelievable breakthrough. Next slide. Today, globalization is driven by these things: microchips, satellites, fiber optics, the internet. These are all technologies too. It's as you'll see, it's the rise of technology, and then their sharing around the world that has really moved the world from a size medium to size small, not literally, but figuratively. As you'll see, we can talk and see and interact with each other anytime, any place around the world today. Next slide. So what we have today is a multipolar world, many points of power. There's an old saying that you don't need to immigrate to innovate. We went from the G8, those are the 8 wealthy countries that used to dominate, including most of Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, etc., Japan, to 20, where the new big emerging markets, including the sub-Saharan markets of Africa, India, China, Mexico, Brazil, they said we want in the club here, to what we call a G0, where innovation and change and power can come from anywhere today. And it's been driven by 3 democratizations of information technology and finance. And I can run through those very quickly. Next slide. Democratization of information, how we look at our world. We use satellites, we use connectivity. Millions now can see what others are seeing. Millions can see that they're being seen, and we can sell and buy as never before around the world. That's because we all have access to information. Next slide. Democratization of technology, how we communicate. We use all of these technologies, and what we do is that we have a situation now where we exchange information, news, knowledge, money, photos, music, and much more immediately. We are well connected because of these technologies, and the potential for wealth creation has never been greater. Next slide. Finally, the democratization of finance, how we invest. This is what if you have a great idea, if you're a great innovator or you're an entrepreneur and you have an idea, because of these democracies, you can play in the game. Because you can get financing, you can market your product or service around the world with technologies, and you can find information on anything you want, competition, markets, etc. This is what I train my students in, and it's an amazing thing. And money is no longer a factor. We used to say that land, labor, and capital were the drivers of economic development. Those are all commodities now. Ideas that drive wealth creation. Next slide. So what distinguishes nations, as I said, used to be land, labor, and capital. It's now ideas. And what we're finding in my country and these part of the world that's really quite wealthy still, that we need to partner with the rest of the world, because that's where if ideas are the driver of wealth, where do ideas come from? They come from people. We need to be involved with the best and brightest people around the world. It's a well-known fact that genius can come from any place. It's not limited to one particular region. Next slide. That's globalization, okay? The world since 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell down, and we went from the old superstory of our time, 2 years later, 1991, the Soviet Union fell apart. We went from the old superstory of our time, which was the communists versus the capitalists, the central planners versus the open-ended market people, the democracy versus totalitarianism. That went away and globalization came in. We've been there for 30 years now, 1989 to 31 years to the year 2020. And the wealth until recently, because of the pandemic, which I predict will soon be back once we have a vaccine, the wealth went from a total world wealth of approximately $34 trillion to over 100 trillion today. And never in the history of mankind has there been wealth creation like that, and it's all been driven by this thing called globalization. Next slide. So what does it mean? What does it mean for nations, companies, and individuals? I'll run through this quickly because I want to get to another proposal before my time is up. Next slide. For a nation, it means that you have to put on what Thomas Friedman, the great writer about globalization, said, the golden straitjacket. That's a metaphor for a profile of your country. Do you have low inflation? Do you have a shrinking state bureaucracy? Do you have low corruption, elimination of tariff, private enterprise growing, etc.? If you have a profile like that, investment, entrepreneurs, ideas flow. That's what policy is all about. Create a country, but via policies that reflects these attributes. Next slide. What does it mean for companies? Well, for companies, it means what we call the fourth democratization. That's that you have to be a company that shares ideas from the top down, the bottom up, from side to side. Indeed, the top will still be deciding where we're going, what business we'll be in, and what will be our culture, what will be our values. But the bottom will be empowered. I tell my students who are just graduating, you're going to be empowered to make decisions about markets, competitors, products, pricing, distribution, promotions, etc. You're going to be empowered. So you got to know stuff, but you have to be able to use it too. And that's what we call experiential learning. That's what I do most of the time. Next slide. It also means that shared knowledge is the only commodity that will separate you from your competitors. Knowledge is the driver of wealth creation and the creation of the highest quality products at the lowest possible price. You do that, you win, no matter where you are. Next slide. What it requires for the world is that you understand in international business and globalization the new. We all seek to be improved, to have more for our children, to have more modernity and prosperity. But we all want to hang on to what's known as our olive tree, our family, our communities, our tribe, our religion, our culture. You want to be successful in this globalized world? Indeed, embrace the modernity that's there, the technologies, the finance, the information. But never forget that we people value our culture. Do not insult a person's culture as you move into the globalized world, or you will fail. Find the balance. Next slide. The global entrepreneur then, in the globalized world, needs to be global in outlook, practical instead of just theoretical. You need to be multidisciplinary. You need to be a boundary spanner. You need to be, these are characteristics that, I have a little survey and I ask my students, rate yourself. Well, are you ready to be a global entrepreneur? Do you have these characteristics? Next slide. Ask yourself, if you're going to be a global entrepreneur or entrepreneur just starting in your own domestic market, do you have these characteristics? Are you curious? Are you creative? Do you have a sense of adventure? These are all the best of human characteristics. Tell me about your ambitions. Do you have problem-solving skills? These all sound like cliches, but it's very true. Can you see the individual tree and the forest? These are things that I can actually tell you how you reach these things and how you can be on your careers throughout your professional life to make sure these reflect what you are. You need to be a boundary spanner. Next slide. So what does it all mean? It highlights the importance of knowledge. Globalization is going to be here. It's going to be driven by knowledge. Next slide. It's not going away, okay? There are those in the world today, including in my country with our current president, who tends to be somewhat of a make America great authoritarian, pull us back. It's not going to go away. I mean, there is ample evidence in history where companies like the Chinese and others, countries have shut off their access to the world and their economies have fallen off a cliff. The world's not going back. Those who embrace it, they'll see their standard of living rise. Those who don't will be overwhelmed by the competition. Next slide. Is there one more, Nicole?
No, that's it.
Okay, well, let's switch to my last document then, because I want to propose something to the listeners and to our group.
Okay.
And this is a Word document, so it's not a PowerPoint slide, but it's got the graphs and whatnot I wanted to show you. And I want to put this forward for sharing an idea. And any of you on this conference this morning that would like to know more about this, feel free to email me. You can see my email there and whatnot. But let's go to the first graph. Just scroll down. Go ahead. Okay, right there. Now, this is what we call, maybe just a little more. There we go. This is called the VITAL model, and we're missing an arrow there, but it's the Vibrant International Trade Alliance. And what it amounts to is that here in Virginia, we have put together, under the auspices of our governor funding this program, a consortium of public universities like mine. There are 15 of them in the state of Virginia. The state agencies for international trade, and entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises, that what we do is I put my teams of my graduate students onto projects aimed at entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises, and we do semester-long analysis of international markets and how they can move into them and take advantage of it. It's absolutely, I've run probably, I don't know, 60 projects like this. I've learned a ton of stuff about different businesses, running from large to small to medium size. And what we've done is if you go to the next slide, what we've done is we've created a model where the entrepreneur realizes great markets are on the outside, outside of my country. Well, the U.S. we are wealthy. There's no, of that $100 trillion a year in GDP that we have now in the world, the U.S. gets 20 trillion. So we got 20%, and we're only 5% of the world's economy in terms of population. That's all going to change. Okay? But it doesn't mean we need to, my children and my grandchildren need to be less off. The world economy is going to grow as we start to embrace markets around the world. And the way we do that is we create a model that brings together small to medium-sized enterprises that get new markets, government agencies that increase the tax revenues because these markets are being sold into from small enterprises. We create the next generation of savvy and ready to go new millennial managers. That's the current generation of managers that know how to analyze markets around the world and actually create strategies for entering them. And we actually end up, as you'll see in the next slide, the model that Sambo Chanda and I are going to propose for Africa. It's a little bit, I don't know if you can pull it up and see it all at once, but basically it says, look, bring together in sub-Saharan Africa or all of Africa, the major players, put these have a conference, put these ideas on the table, bring in the state agencies or the international agencies, such as those are now forming with the African Free Trade Agreement across all of Africa. Bring in the to medium-sized enterprises, and you end up with wealth creation and, frankly, the enhancement of each country's brand around the world. Because at the end of the day, branding, I take it with a grain of salt because I'm a marketing prof, but branding is the name of the game. It's kind of, in finishing this, there's a great story about in my country in the 1930s, there was a bank robber by the name of Willie Sutton. And they captured Willie and they put him in jail, and the reporters came around and they said, Willie, why did you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. Okay. Well, why do you want to be involved with branding? You think about supply chains from the very end where raw materials are dug out of the ground and manufactured into the first notions of a product. They're all put together maybe in an international country. They're shipped to my country, America. We put a brand on them like for, Apple or IBM, and then we sell it. Where do you think the money is? Is it back in the back of the channel, or is it up with the brand? If I laid a large piece of leather on the table, and I said, come feel this, and it's been processed, and you go, oh, that's kind of nice. And then I said, here's a large piece of leather, but here's a little tiny handbag. It's about that big, right? It's got a nice little clasp, and women like it, and it has a little brand that says Gucci. What do you think is more valuable, big piece of leather or little tiny handbag? Because it has Gucci on it, it's the little handbag. That's what this is all about, creating brand names that resonate around the world, not only for your company, but also your country and your continent. That's what I'd like to propose and see if we can move this forward. It's proven here in Virginia. We've run it for the last 6 years. We've had enormous wealth creation from it, and perhaps Anakazi could be part of that creation of this kind of ideas in Africa too. That's my story. I hope it was resonated with you all. I hope it has some meaning. Thank you for having me.
So much, Professor Wood. I'm just thinking, Nicole, would you like to ask Professor Wood a question? Because Nicole is actually in marketing. So, Nicole?
I am. As soon as he started talking about, marketing and branding, I got all excited over here. So that definitely resonated with me. Marketing is key. It's important when advertising or showcasing your business, your products. I love the example that you gave with the robber and why did you rob the bank? Because that's where the money is. You would have known that if it wasn't branded well to go there. So the branding would draw people in.
Right.
So I definitely appreciated everything that you shared with that. The marketing piece definitely resonated well with me. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Wood.
Sambo, you're muted.
Oops, I'm not. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. So I have a question. With the pandemic and the disruption of supply chains, there's been conversations around people who think that, this is the end for globalization, and from your presentation, we're able to learn that we're not going back, we're not going to go back in this ideal world where everybody else operates and works as an island. And then I'm just thinking, we have seen back home in Africa, the way China has kind of taken a hold on, a lot of countries. I'm not going to talk about date, but I'm going to talk about, supply and provision of goods and services. There's a very huge presence of China on the continent. So that's one part of the bucket. And then the other part of the bucket is that the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, they say that trade within Africa is just about 2%. It was about 2% between 2015 and 2017. So trade within the continent is so restricted. And then we're talking about globalization. What advice would you have for countries in Africa or institutions in Africa, think tanks and policymakers in terms of what they should be thinking about to kind of, promote trade within the continent for a start? Because, and I know to an extent this is a little bit unfair because Africa is so diverse, like all the 54 countries have their own characteristics, but what really should they be focusing on?
Okay, that's a great question. Keep in mind that from those who would say the pandemic is going to drive globalization away, I see it just the opposite. If there ever been more evidence that we need to be an integrated, communicating world society in sharing ideas, particularly in the pandemic, sharing ideas about vaccines, about the virus, about healthcare, about the ideas can come from anywhere. We need to integrate and get those ideas flowing. For the basis of healthcare and the future. I mean, that's so readily apparent to scientists and to those who are battling the pandemic. So that's the sort of nonsense that the pandemic is going to drive us away. It has slowed international trade. It's going to teach us. That doesn't kill us, makes us stronger. We're going to come out of this stronger. Now, with respect to Africa, indeed, I read about Africa all the time. I'm very aware of the diversity. In fact, that's one of my great attractions. I've always said that plurality and variety make life rich. There's no better place to get both of those than out there where you're dealing with other cultures and other ideas and differences. It truly is a rich world when you can fill your life up with things that aren't readily available to you or new ideas. That's really what the experience of life is all about. And that's why I've been traveling since I've been 19 years old and was in that merchant ship which you spoke about, which is about 10 years ago, right? That's a little joke. It's been longer than 10 years. But I would recommend that you have a new free trade agreement that's being formed in all Pan-Africa. You have a new agreement that's right now with Kenya and the United States that's could become a model for individual countries having free trade agreements with the United States and other countries embedded in this larger free trade agreement across Pan-Africa. There's some really exciting things coming about that. But if you look at why do you think the major automobile companies around the world are investing heavily in Mexico? Is it because Mexico has so many people that want to buy, Fiats and Audis and Volkswagens and Fords and Toyotas? No, it's because Mexico has over 100 free trade agreements with countries around the world. You come and build a platform in Mexico, you can export to all those markets at an enormously reduced tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and it's a strategy. And the same thing could apply in Africa. Get the foreign investors to come and invest in whatever country you have, because you can use this as a platform to enhance your exports, hard currency earnings, idea flow, etc. And the topic you brought up of China is a very interesting one. We don't have really enough time to go into it in depth, but believe me, I've been watching China a lot. My first time I went to China was 1971. I've been in and out of there forever. I've seen the explosive growth, and they're not going back. But they do represent an alternative model for the human endeavor, one that doesn't include democracy right now, one that doesn't include truly the embrace of capitalism. 55% of China's economy is still state-run enterprises. Okay, so somebody I once said, "Who do you think will win in the big emerging market field? Will it be India or China?" I've said, well, that's kind of a silly question because it's much more complex than that. But I would pick India, even though they're currently behind China, for two reasons. One, they're a democracy, and that's the democracy is that safety valve that allows society to blow off steam. Vote the policymakers out. Change your world with the vote. China can't do that. And two, like many countries in Africa, India, one of the few great things they got from the British over their 250-year rule of India was they got the English language. And English is the currency of the spoken word in international business. It might not be forever, but now it is. So given they're a democracy and they move and shake in English, I think there's ample opportunity for India to easily catch China in the future. But those are just some thoughts by me, and I look forward to hearing from anyone on this conference, and particularly I'd like to elaborate further with anyone interested about the creation of a vibrant international trade alliance model in Africa. We can do this.
That is great. Thank you. It's okay. We do have another question that came in the chat for you, Dr. Wood. It says, what would the impact of globalization, technology, and race issues have for future work?
Wow, great question.
Yes.
One that you could probably answer in just a couple of words. Not, it's like super complex. Listen, I think that around the world, but particularly in my country, we're I'm very attuned to what's going on in terms of race relations. I run programs up in my city in the East End, which is basically a project, a ghetto. And we take young students. I put my BCU students in combination with young middle-aged junior high school students, and we take them to places. We take them off of that environment. We say, hey, here's a big museum. What do you see in here? How's it run? What do we do to make this work? And then we take them into the university. We take them into businesses. We say, you can be anything you like. You don't need to be stuck here because of the realities of historical precedent that led you to here. If we all know, we don't have a lot of time here, but in my country, slavery, emancipation, Jim Crow laws, redlining, the Voting Rights Acts of 65, the Civil Rights Acts of 64, and now what we've got with Black Lives Matter, we're on the way to being truly colorblind, truly gender blind, and truly a human race that looks at you as an individual that says, hey, what are you bringing to the table here? What do you like? What's your character like? Where you don't look at anybody because they're different than you. You look at them at, what are you bringing to the table? And if you bring something to the table, you're welcome to eat. I'm very optimistic about the human endeavor. And by the way, I have 3 children, and they are all colorblind. And I'm very proud of that.
Thank you, Dr. Wood.
Yeah.
Eureka has a question. Could you go ahead?
Yes, I do have a question and just a comment. So we launched Anakazi sometime in 2011. And around that time, there was a lot of conversation around AGOA and capitalizing on AGOA, especially on the African continent. And we did learn some challenges from that program or that initiative. And specifically, for example, the textile industry. And so there were a lot of women under the textile industry. So sometime in 2013 and 2012, we were hosting these women who were sponsored by the State Department to come here on business exchange programs. And we learned that the cost of raw materials for them to produce, for example, their clothing, was extremely expensive for them to manufacture on the continent. And then for landlocked countries like Zambia, transportation would be a major issue, and it would add cost to their products, so making it difficult for them to export. Technology was a major issue as well, and it continues to be an issue. And in fact, when we had a conference recently, we were talking about reaching women entrepreneurs on social media and other, just general mobile-based technology. We were advised that we need to consider technologies that can work in rural settings of Africa. So these are just some of the challenges that we've learned on Anakazi. And then there's also access to finance. And we also identified access to business development support networks, which brings me to your proposal to have this platform for entrepreneurs. It would be excellent, because we need that collaboration and sharing of information for business entrepreneurs. But we also need to consider very basic technologies for women in the rural parts of Africa. What have you seen in your studies and what you're teaching all these different entrepreneurship students? What have you seen as far as basic technologies that we can capitalize on for our entrepreneurs? And how would your model work? How would your model work if we had to bring all these different universities, entrepreneurs on one platform? How would it work?
Right, and just to if you have time, you could share those graphs that I have for the vital program with your audience. But what it also includes is not just African universities with African entrepreneurs and African trade agencies, but also hooking those up with, in particular, what Sambo and I are proposing is that they hook up with universities like mine into that network, so that my students are interacting and speaking using technologies like this to understand each other better and to seek out common markets and opportunities together. My students would learn about what's going on in Africa. Your students would learn about what's going on in the United States, and specifically not at the always at the only at the 30,000 foot level, but at the very beginning. We have markets opening up for these types of products in my country. Let's put together a consortium that would allow Africa to become involved in the exportation of that. I do think, I've been involved in some research with respect to technologies with mobile banking in Africa and in the big emerging markets. And that's one of those leapfrog technologies, okay, where you no longer, you literally don't even need a brick and mortar bank, okay? If you're a rural individual and you have access to the internet, which is a problem, but is being solved, you can do internet banking and buy and sell from your cell phone. And we see this in Kenya especially. The classic example of that is the individuals who are on basically cell phones as opposed to smartphones, as opposed to computers, communicating around the world with opportunities that exist to buy and sell. Kenya is now the #1 exporter of cut flowers to Europe. They rival what's going on in Holland. Why? Because they get instant information of where the flowers, where they're needed, what's the global price for these, how do we get them there, global transportation, we can ship them by air freight overnight. And it's taken that little sector called the international global flower market, cut flowers, and just exploded it. And the same thing can be replicated, I think, in all sorts of food stuff. That we're working with a company now that's working here in Virginia, and they're going to be exporting frozen tilapia, which is a type of freshwater fish, around the world in terms of frozen fillets. We're finding them up markets. Years ago, you couldn't do that. You couldn't freeze these fish, put them on a plane, send them to a market, they'll be in the next day. All of this is available now. And there are entities, the distribution and the logistic entities that specialize in this. So you as the entrepreneur, you have to have the idea, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to create wealth. And then you put together your team of individuals that were made up of finance individuals, logistic individuals that will be importing your products, and you create wealth. And I've been working at this, like I say, with companies for, well, I like to say 30 years, it's actually probably more like 40 now, but time goes on. So I think all of those issues you brought up, Radhika, are important, but none of them are deal killers. None of them will stop a bright, dedicated, motivated entrepreneur and a policy that they can hook onto, that the government set in place to allow that growth to happen.
Right.
Great. You have another question, Eureka?
No, I think he addressed it. I think Anakazi, we've always thought about our model to cover more than one country. It's always been our thought that we would have chapters in different countries and then would network them on a platform. So it's similar to the model that you started here in Virginia, but we wanted to start with a region. So we started with a chapter in Zambia. Then we considered a chapter in South Africa, another chapter in Kenya because of, like you mentioned, the technology there. The women are very savvy. And then we also have a chapter here in the United States. So the way we were doing it is collaborating with different women that came through the African Women Entrepreneurs Program. When they come here to the US, would host them every year. And that way it opened us up to different entrepreneurs from different countries, because they would bring at least 40 top entrepreneurs every year. So that was a good exchange of information and also understanding of what the needs are. And we would like to continue on that program and expand as much as we can, chapter by chapter.
Yeah, you probably are aware of this, but one of the things that oftentimes entrepreneurs maybe overlook when they're looking for contacts around the world is what we call the diaspora. Okay, you know what the wealthiest in terms of wealth creation diaspora is in my country right now, in the United States? It's the individuals that have immigrated into the United States from Nigeria.
Wow.
They are creating enormous wealth. They're kind of under the radar screen because there's all sorts of other people here too, like the Indians, the Chinese, But that's what if you can tap into the those who are from your home country, and believe me, when I deal with I'm obviously of European descent. I play that card all the time when I'm trying to put together a consortium, let's say coming out of Germany or England. I always say, well, my ancestors came from there, and so we got a lot in common, and it works. But it's that olive tree thing, remembering your culture, using that to build those relationships. Life's about two things: the experiences you have and the relationships you build. Other than that, I don't think you get to you're gonna get to take anything with you. Those are the most important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Wood, for speaking with us this morning and for sharing your knowledge on globalization. I am so excited about the prospects that we have to work together with Anakazi in the future and start implementing the Vital model. We can start a pilot that would really be great and exciting.
I think that'd be great.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Wood, it was amazing. I enjoyed it every minute.